Hello and welcome to this Developing Advisory Skills presentation. My name is Laura Minikin and I'm delighted to share these next 20 minutes with you. Please put the sound on. It is an interactive presentation or workshop if you like. It'll take around about 20 minutes, so please feel free to take some notes. Okay, thanks for your time. Having a true understanding of what it is like for our dyslexic learners and colleagues can be quite difficult to imagine. However, the more awareness we have regarding challenges such as decoding or working memory can help us better plan sessions to engage the learner and inspire learning. So, how does it feel to struggle with dyslexia? Take the simple task of remembering a common familiar word, in this case, yesterday. If English is your first language, then it's likely that this word is very familiar to you and easy to access in terms of reading, vocabulary and memory. Now I'd like you to spell the word backwards and pause the recording if you need a little more time. Now, it's not a really simple word to recall, but your familiarity with this word may likely allow you to find strategies to spell the word backwards. Maybe you visualize the words in your mind's eye and read it or see it backwards. Now, for a strategy like this, it is your working memory that allows you to do this. In fact, an article published in 2018 by Adams, Guyon and Cohen highlighted that the working memory is what allows you to temporarily hold that data in your awareness, for you to then manipulate it for the task at hand. So in this case, your working memory is allowing you to hold on to the word yesterday in order for you to then spell it backwards. Now, much research has linked poor working memory and dyslexia, and recent work by Meller, Yerns and Skugard in 2019 identified that this challenge is intensified when there is no familiarity with meaning or context. So with that in mind, let's see if we can create a sense of what it might be like for our dyslexic learners who may not have access to a strong working memory or word familiarity. I'd like you to remember this word. And again, pause the recording if you wish. You probably know what's coming next. So now spell the word backwards. So what was different this time around? Pause the recording here and take a few minutes to think about these questions here and maybe write down your thoughts. So now you've had a little insight into how it feels, let's explore some perceptions and misinterpretations about dyslexia. One of the biggest challenges is overcoming stigma and attitudes regarding dyslexia and neurodiversity in general. Yet much of this could be avoided with greater awareness of how dyslexia presents, and this could avoid those misinterpretations and help challenge perceptions. What presents as consistently poor spelling, such as missing letters or illogical word construction, can be a sign of problems with phoneme and grapheme links. In 2005, Shaywitz and Shaywitz demonstrated how this could indicate that your learner has some poor phonemic awareness, and so they try to spell the words as they sound. This could be things like lion written as L-Y-N, for example. However, it's important to note that with spelling difficulties, it isn't just phonemic awareness that needs to be considered. In a 2020 meta-analysis by Galushka and others, there was significant evidence to show that a strong understanding of morphological analysis will help a learner improve understanding of context, therefore reducing the need to rely on just phonologically plausible options. Spelling aside, you may identify a learner as being particularly agitated when it comes to reading exercises. Maybe they are slow readers and struggle with pronunciation and what could be perceived as a reluctance to join in when reading out loud, and this could be due to real challenges that put the learner on the spot and really damage their confidence and self-efficacy. Behaviours such as these may be linked to slow processing skills or poor working memory, and learners may struggle to decode the letters that they are seeing. All of this will have an impact on the learner's ability to comprehend meaning behind the text that they are reading, and so you may find learners struggle to recall what they've just read. Another common misconception is that some learners are just scatty and have poor organisational skills. Maybe they're throwing out ideas that seem to be completely random and out of context. Or maybe they're just repeatedly late and seem to have no grasp of time management skills. These are all indicators of dyslexia, and yet if missed, these traits could have significant impact on future demands, such as higher education or even employment. These are all aspects of cognitive processing, and there are many things we can do as facilitators to support our learners who struggle with cognition and executive function. So let's explore these strategies in a little more detail. Have a read of this. That was 20 seconds, and yet in that space of time you're not only having to read a lot of text, but you're also expected to pick up the context and even understand the content to make it meaningful. And it's likely that many of you didn't even have the chance to finish reading at all. Taking dyslexia aside for the moment, that is a lot of information that I'm expecting you to process. And I didn't make it easy for you. There was a lot to read. You didn't have any context beforehand. There were no titles, there were no introductions. Now, these are things that we as educators and line managers may easily overlook or assume in lessons that are so familiar to us. But it highlights the challenges every learner may face without careful analysis of our lesson plans. Now, add on top of that the cognitive challenges that dyslexic learners face, and it must feel incredibly overwhelming and isolating. Indeed, interesting research conducted in 2020 by Beveridge, Macri and McFarlane demonstrated that low self-confidence linked to feelings of uncertainty can continue to affect learners' self-efficacy when it comes to exploring new words and reading. So how did it feel to be faced with all of that text? What about all the things you had to do to achieve the task, such as tracking, establishing context? What other demands might that task have asked of you? Finally, take a couple of minutes to consider your own practice in the classroom. What types of activities do you do that could overload your learner or make them feel uncomfortable? What might you do differently or think about doing differently to make your learner's experience more accessible and enjoyable? And if you wish, you may even pause the recording here for a little reflection time. Let's now move our attention to spelling. Here you have a complex word on the screen, which many learners may find difficult to spell. This often isn't helped by regional differences in pronunciation, such as anaesthetic or an aesthetic. Equally, having the S before the TH can add additional challenges, as it's not that common a placement in English. So what strategies do you use when spelling this word? We mentioned earlier that context and meaning were powerful tools to help dyslexic learners with comprehension and ultimately establishing links to long-term memory. An interesting article in Scientific American by Shaywitz in 1996 discussed how outdated strategies such as rote learning can be particularly challenging for dyslexic learners. So, what methods are there to help with spelling and reading? Well, some strategies you may already adopt could be to consider morphology and etymology, and that is the structure of the word and the word's origin. Let's take with this example. You may have identified the base word aesthet, meaning to feel. And if you know this word, then any word that contains this base will likely be linked to feeling, sense or perception, such as kinesthetic or synesthesia. That's where senses become muddled in a way, so you sense colour as if it were sound, for example. You may have recognised the prefix an, meaning without, making this link to a lack of feeling or a lack of perception. You could have even spotted the suffix tic as relating to a state, so giving you the link that this word relates to a state that is void of feelings. In fact, Just having understanding of the prefixes and suffixes can help a learner find clues as to what this new word may be relating to. And this can be a really powerful technique, as it challenges a word and changes it from being a complete unknown to a word that may be linked to something more tangible that they can recognise or at least associate with. Some of you may have recognised the word's etymology being Greek in origin, and this may give you hints into the typical spelling patterns, such as using the letters A and E rather than just E. In fact, exploring the etymology of words can be incredibly fun and engaging for many learners across the whole age range. Games such as Snap or Matching Pairs can be played at varying levels of difficulty and still provide a unique way of exploring connections between words and decoding them, rather than simply remembering single word definitions in isolation. Bowers and Bowers published a paper in 2018 stressing the importance of etymology and morphology in spelling and how it helps provide meaning and logic to language. And this can give learners strategies to decode words, especially those that are not phonemically regular. So linking back to the prefix and suffix here, knowing what an means gives you access to decipher other words such as anomaly or anonymous. And recognising tick can give you clues to what type of words hypnotic or antibiotic may be. Ultimately, morphology and etymology provide a sort of structure for the learner to connect words together, allowing for a framework or building block to work from. And this in turn can help with identifying meaning and context and help to establish those long-term memory links. There are many other aspects of literacy development that can often be overlooked when favouring traditional teaching methods. Let's consider decoding, for example. Our ability to recognise sounds and blends can help us create associations with graphemes, but English words are not always regular, and differences in pronunciation can be very confusing when there doesn't always appear to be any consistency. Take the letters O-U-G-H, for example. How many words can you think of that use this spelling? And how many of these words sound completely different to each other? Cough, tough, though, through, all have the same letters, but are very different phonetically. What if I ask you to read this? Imagine trying to read when words look like this all of the time. How long would it take? Interestingly, a study published in 2018 considered the possibility of vowel dyslexia, where vowels just disappeared when reading. And this was linked to a potential problem with reading via the sublexical route. Either way, it highlights the importance that reading comprehension requires a multifaceted approach, and working solely on one approach, for example, would make this task virtually impossible. However, you may have used the icon to give you a hint. And actually, images can be incredibly powerful for dyslexic learners to help bring context and connections with the text in front of them. And this could be one way to help your learner when considering lesson plans or even workplace PowerPoints. But let's now look at a seemingly simple decoding task. Here, the word strap could be broken down into 5 individual sounds, but each of those sounds require the learner to connect the sound to the symbols, or the phoneme to the grapheme, and then hold each of those sounds in the working memory to then further blend them all together to form a coherent word. And this can be incredibly challenging for anyone who struggles with processing and working memory deficits. However, attacking this word by using an onset and rhyme approach, for example, reduces the load on the learner, meaning they only need to remember 2 pieces of information, as opposed to 5. It's important to highlight, however, that it is the rich spectrum of skills that influence literacy, and getting too focused on a single approach can be counterproductive. Research conducted by Snowling, Hume, Lister and Lervag in 2021 identified how language comprehension, morphology and phonology together significantly influence reading comprehension in the long term, and this highlights the potential risk that some traditional teaching methods may be less broad and are too narrowly focused, when it comes to learning methodologies. One of the biggest and potentially overlooked areas of support is encouraging the learner to identify the tools they need to help with organisation of thought. Often dyslexic individuals can become bombarded with thoughts and ideas, making connections to topics that on the surface may seem to have no logical link at all. This can become incredibly overwhelming, and when asked to put these ideas into a linear structure such as an essay or business plan, individuals can become almost paralysed by analysis. Even the most simplest of strategies, such as post-it notes, can give the learners the freedom to chop and change their structure, find groupings and connected topics, and even scrap ideas that don't fit into the required headings. There's been much research into mind mapping, using images and colours to identify topics and connections, which can provide many learners with a more visual representation of their work. And in their 2013 book, Introduction to Dyslexia, Reed and Peer recommended using mind maps as an effective tool to assist dyslexic learners with memory and revision. Regardless of approach, what's important is that we encourage our learners to evaluate their ideas and knowledge, rather than just their ability to write. And this is where metacognitive questions and metalinguistic awareness can really help bridge the gap. Asking questions that foster second-order thinking, such as how concepts can be applied to other environments, say lessons or at home or the workplace. These types of thought-provoking questions may assist with developing sound problem-solving skills and critical thinking, which are essential really throughout life, and especially in industry. And this leads us to consider assistive technology and utilising resources that individuals will likely be expected to use in the workplace, such as IT. There are some very technical and expensive tools available. However, Microsoft have some of the most simple and effective tools available for free, and encouraging our learners to utilise these can make significant differences, especially for older learners and colleagues. Microsoft's Assistive Reader, or Read Aloud, has come on leaps and bounds in recent years. You can change the voice, you can change the speed, and there really isn't any hint of a robot these days, which makes the Read Aloud option a very, very natural option. Office Dictate has been one of the most effective for our adult cohort, who often struggle with writing emails. Again, the technology is very sensitive and accurate, and captures punctuation, making writing tasks much more manageable and can save a lot of time. Finally, the Immersive Reader tool can help change background colour and provide reading guides to really focus the learner on the reading material. Now, there's many more tools available, and if learners have access to Microsoft OneNote, then the functionality for dyslexic learners is phenomenal, in my opinion. But that's for another session. Multisensory learning, in particular kinesthetic approaches, have been shown to significantly help learners with literacy challenges, as it stimulates multiple parts of the brain. And so maximising on the sensory experiences in lesson development can be a very effective way to engage dyslexic learners. Audiobooks can offer an alternative or complementary resource, allowing learners to read along with the audio and stimulate that multisensory learning. Cheaper alternatives again could simply be allowing yourself to be creative with lesson materials, such as code word exercises, Pelmanism games, or the use of wooden letters to provide that more tactile correlation with the letters. Ultimately, it's about keeping your learner engaged and motivated, so enabling them to take as much ownership as possible with their learning, and encouraging independence through self-checks, for example, can be a useful tool to include in lesson plans. And of course, keeping the content appropriate enough that the learner is inspired and not overwhelmed or understimulated. Have a think back to the first exercise. What technique did you use to help you remember? As you're thinking about that, are you aware that you're now actually thinking about your thinking? Put another way, you're allowing yourself to have an awareness into your own thought processes. Such skills can help with executive function, such as planning and problem solving, and support you in self-assessment and analysis of your progress, enabling you to continually reassess your output against what is needed. Metacognition is what allows you to self-reflect and adapt, rather than forge ahead ignorant to the evidence or your environment. Asking yourself, what would happen if, or how can I apply this elsewhere, can create connections that help you think bigger than simply the task at hand. What might this learning enable you to do in other aspects of your life, such as work or relationships? When was the last time you overcame a challenge? What else have you applied that learning to? And how empowering does it feel to learn, remember, and apply those new skills? Take a couple of minutes to think about the strategies you use in everyday life to help you think about thinking. And what questions do you ask yourself? What about the classroom or workplace? How much emphasis is given to this metacognition? Pause the recording and take a few minutes to think about questions you could introduce in the classroom that encourage metacognition. You may have come up with examples such as, do I have all the resources I need to start the task? Is there anything I need to do differently? Maybe what worked well? How can I apply this elsewhere? Why not have a look at Cambridge mentor Richard Hester's 20 metacognitive questions to see how you can encourage metacognition in the classroom? It's a really simple, handy guide. But I've taken enough of your time already, so I will stop it there and say thank you very much for your time, and I really hope you took something from the session.